pharmaceutical A is making this drug, and they don't want to lose the market. So they'll ferociously campaign against each other, trying to persuade people to keep buying this drug. That's not in the interest of society. In a prize model, because it's not linked to manufacture, this company will already have got a prize for it. And if it gets superseded by somebody who innovates afterwards, they'll get a prize too. They'll get a different rate depending on how much innovation. But you'll be able to still then buy the thing which is most appropriate. You don't get this mismatch.
Thank you very much, Tim. Next one there, then here.
So this, I think, is addressed more to Stuart. One of your proposals for how to deal with things is more openness. And openness is a good thing. Of course, sunshine is a well-known disinfectant. But I'm interested here on your thoughts about the balance. It's my experience, and I think Gabor would have facts that back this up, that most of the research actually has no commercial implications or commercial concerns. But the types of conflict of interest forms that are already required at the journals, although inadequate in some cases, have an onerous nature about them. And what's the right balance between a something that requires all of the scientists to go through a very onerous procedure to actually provide the safeguards against the relatively small fraction of research that would benefit from such a thing? And maybe how would you look to find such a balance? Or is it better to find a more targeted approach?
I think in being targeted, you would need to consider first the areas of where there is most potential for harm to the public, affecting public safety, environmental problems, or areas within science and technology that are most controversial, whether it's GM crops or global warming at the moment. Having journals with high standards on conflicts of interest there, I think, would particularly help. And the reason why certain pharmaceutical medical journals have enacted it is because they've identified a particular problem, and there's a public health concern, and so they've enacted procedures. Now, I agree with you, it can go too far, but I think that can certainly that certainly is a way of judging it, and I think it's yeah. I mean, I'm not sure I'd add much more to that. It's kind of choosing it on the potential for harm and the controversy of the subject, and wanting public understanding to be improved through that process. So that's where you start.
Thanks.
So I've got a question about the prize model. It's for, or maybe it's a comment, and it's that I think there's a risk, first of all, although it's a really interesting idea, there's a risk that you could, by introducing a prize model in the US market, for example, you could basically just kill off a moribund industry, as in pharmaceuticals. And maybe that's not a bad thing, you know, or maybe it's a good thing, maybe it's a bad thing. I'm not going to comment on that. But there's a sort of thing about be careful what you wish for there, because if you then end up having to recreate drug discovery industry from the ashes of the pharma industry, my concern is that the Me Too's, although it doesn't look that great, all these companies producing Me Too's, at the moment, as drugs stand right now, they're not very good. And if you've got a prize model, right, are you saying there's going to be one drug for depression, one drug for diabetes? And the Me Too competition and the incentive of the patent, which is the prize, is at least keeping companies going. And if they know they can have a slice, or at least a slice of the market, then, you know, that it's not all bad.
Well, but, okay, so I'm not talking about only giving money for the first person. I mean, you know, you would get some money for a Me Too, you just wouldn't get very much if it wasn't very innovative compared with what was there before. And, you know, if it turns out that the first version only treats a third of the population and the next one treats another third of the population, you probably get a similar amount. So that's the kind of modelling in terms of exactly how much you get for how much innovation you put in. So, you know, again, this you can emulate, you can simulate this. It should end up being really quite similar for these companies in terms of the effort they put in. There are all kinds of derivatives you can do. There's been discussion about taking one of the biggest costs, which is the trials, out of the equation and make them public. There's been discussion in this country of setting up a trials agency. There are already a lot of trials being run outside the commercials, and there's some argument to say that would actually be a good thing because it would remove a lot of this controversy about picking the right trial, there has been a move. Now you have to register trials in the US. There's an agency, and so you can't hide trials that you didn't publish anymore because you have to register them all. And so this may actually change that model slightly. So would I kill off the market in the US? One of the things that I think, I can't remember which speaker, well, I think it was you, who said that now a lot of the innovation is coming from the small companies, and it's the big companies buying them when they do something interesting. In this model, you know, it's a bit like the record industry and why do you go to a company if you can get a prize directly? You know, if you do the innovation and get as far as some approval process without, you haven't got to pull in the power of big pharma, you can be rewarded directly and then allow other people to manufacture. It could be the death of some of these large things, but everybody seems to say, including the insurance industry, I had Goldman Sachs come and talk to us about this, saying they're worried about overexposure to pharma because they just don't think the model's sustainable. Business models have changed before and the world hasn't ended. The capitalization of the pharmaceutical industry in the US is not so large, you know. If there was a rearrangement, we've had a rearrangement of the car industry in the US. I think the innovation wouldn't go away, it would just be packaged in a different way.
Just to add one thing to that, I think I basically agree with that, but there is one problem with the current rate at which R&D is being dismantled in farm industry, which is that there is a lot of value being destroyed because it's being done piecemeal, bit by bit. And I would just suggest that there's a virtue in taking the whole problem by the throat and doing something drastic rather than letting it sort of dribble away, because I think that's where the loss of value is. And if it would almost have to be a government initiative, I think, to do something dramatic and sort of reverse the trends all at once.
But there's a real problem about turkeys and Christmas, isn't there? I mean, I think more than one of you mentioned the lobbying power. And that's what's happening, isn't it? That it's the only way is to slowly cut. Is that right?
Yes. Well, to budge the status quo is very difficult because there are so many entrenched interests, exactly. But so much of that is inertia. And so the pharma has a huge lobby, and they, for example, in the U.S., they have been lobbying against healthcare reform, or at least were in the past. If those lobbyists were turned loose on this idea of for example, coming up with legislation that would waive anti-competitive constraints on the sort of cooperative behavior that I was talking about, then you need to have some incentive to get industry involved on the side of change. And I suggested one way would be the tax break for charitable donation.
I would like to have just two comments.
Yeah.
Perhaps a bit controversial. My first one is that although I understand the model, I do have a problem with it, and the problem is that I feel that it basically, you know, is a socializing of the economy, and therefore my question actually goes deeper, because I think that at some point, you know, all of us here have to realize that we do live in a certain type of economic environment, and it happens to be capitalism. I happen to be Hungarian, so I've lived in the other part for quite some time, and I can tell you for a fact